So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you all Katy Smith. And Katy is a graduate student in occupational therapy at Saginaw Valley State University in Michigan, where she is also the president of her Secular Student Alliance. So that's always great. And Katy participates as a volunteer in local politics and hopes to become an environmental-friendly, openly atheist candidate. So someday, if you're from Michigan, or if she runs for national office, you may be voting for her. Please give her a warm welcome. The microphone.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay, so before I go into everything that I want to talk about today, it's kind of heavier, so I thought that it would be nice to start with something kind of funny, because I really like Louis C.K., and he has this bit, and I'll just show it to you.
I hate environmentalists. But that's what people get angry at environmentalists because they think they're slowing down the economy and creating friction. And a lot of these people are Christian. A lot of these people are very devout Christians. And that's such a confusing thing to me, that if you believe that God gave you the earth, that God created the earth for you, why would you not have to look after it? Why would you not think that when he came back, you would go, what the fuck did you do? You motherfucker, are you crazy? The polar bears are brown. What did you do to the polar bear? Did you shit all over every polar bear? What did you? Who did it? Who spilled this shit? Who spilled it? Come over. Did you fucking spill this? What is that? It's oil. It's oil. I didn't even spill. Well, why did you take it out of the fucking ground? Because they wanted to go faster. And I was cold. What the fuck do you mean cold? I gave you everything you needed, you piece of shit. Well, good job. What is a job? Explain to me, what's a fucking job? People like work at a place and when people call when their game doesn't work and you help them figure it out. What do you do that for? For money. What do you need money for? Just eat the shit on the floor. Shit all over the floor. Fucking corn and eat this shit rather than make some bread. What are you doing? Yeah, but it doesn't have like bacon around it. Bacon on it.
All right. Okay. Sorry, I'm not a Mac person, so I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Slideshow. There we go. Okay. So the reason that I picked that clip is because Louis C.K. is kind of poking fun at religious individuals because they sometimes are on this climate denial train. But interestingly, evangelicals are really stepping into this field. So now I'm going to talk about some other things. So each passing day, more news is arriving with further warnings of climate change. And month after month, scientists are coming out with more evidence that climate disruption is exacerbated and accelerated by human activity. So these reports of devastating floods in some areas and creeping drought in others are really paradoxical juxtapositions of shortage and overabundance. So as secularists, we're familiar with the tendency for scientific facts like evolution, for example, to be really detailed and kind of confusing. And so this frequently leads to a denial of facts and general public misunderstanding, and sometimes really intentionally by people that can profit from that kind of distortion. So it's my hope that those of you that are here right now are present because you recognize the profound importance of personal action on the issue of the climate. And I intend to explain why the issue of climate change is not only relevant to a secular perspective, but really kind of necessary for our intellectual congruence. So this is an issue that we really can't leave the faith perspectives alone to solve. In my own life, I've always been really passionate about the environment, from my really early days tromping around through the woods at the Chippewa Nature Center where I live in Midland, Michigan, to later years when I became kind of a rabid recycler, like really oppressive to people around me at times, I think. But anyways, I think this issue of saving the earth is kind of abstract to me, and it always has been, and just like lingering in the periphery of my psyche because it's hard to understand. It's so big. How could my tiny choices, like bringing a reusable grocery bag, make any real difference? And how could it be that when I'm driving my car, I'm like putting out all this carbon dioxide? I can't see it. And so it's hard to understand how much people are actually being affected by climate change right now when I'm living in this bubble of complete abundance. But there it is, really. The issue is not affecting me yet, so I can decide to avoid it. Now, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it's like to be on the outside of a social acceptance and justice, because I'm an atheist, like a lot of you. Yet this problem of the climate, or the fight for marriage equality, which we won, that's exciting, or racial tolerance or equal pay, any of these voyages, they're dependent on us taking action. And action not just by people that are directly affected by the problem, but by those in a privileged enough position to both understand why it is an issue and make big changes. Let me go. Is there a clicking thing? There we go. Sorry. Is it going? There. Okay. So the first thing that I want to highlight is that collectively secular students value empirical evidence as a method for forming our perspectives, whether we're an atheist, an agnostic, a pastafarian, a skeptic, a humanist, whatever we are. So I think that the best example for us on this subject is evolution, because we recognize, and we even really discussed at this conference in a couple different talks, how evolution is a scientific theory, and therefore it's something to be understood. It's not something to be believed. And we spend our time and our energy and money working to stop these policies going into our schools where religious individuals would want to change the way that we teach them. And we're, like from the SSA, we celebrate Darwin Day, and we love having these evolution versus creation debates. And I mean, I liked watching Bill Nye debate Ken Ham. Everybody, it was a good one. But I wonder though, like, as a community, why aren't we weighing in on this issue more? The evidence is just as convincing as any of the transitional fossil bones. So the major cause of the disruption in climate patterns is the elevated level of carbon dioxide, which comes primarily from the burning of fossil fuels. And our atmosphere has changed dramatically in the last 2 centuries, from a sustained 10,000 year average of 275 parts per million of carbon dioxide to roughly 402 parts per million at the present date. Now, the scientific consensus is that the existing biosphere can only be sustained at or below 350 parts per million, but some scientists would actually say it needs to be less than that. So, but science really, it's not the only reason why we can and should take a stand on this issue. Just as the religious are outlining their ethical standpoints in proper alignment with their texts, and so do we. Often our moral views are founded on a perspective called humanism. So according to the American Humanist Association, humanism is a progressive life stance that, without supernaturalism, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead meaningful, ethical lives capable of adding to the greater good of humanity. So I don't think that the religious hold a monopoly on this type of goodness. And honestly, I think a lot of religious actions are sometimes really polarizing and promote the opposite of what they're trying to achieve. So I think we can, and we really should claim caring for the earth as a fundamental tenet of our secular vision for the future. And to me, this is because secular individuals, we take stock of empirical evidence and we're combining it with this humanistic value structure, and we form an innate passion for social justice issues, because our own fight for inclusivity, like I mentioned, parallels the fights of all of these other marginalized groups. So these problems are likely to be made worse by climate change. I think a good example here in the States would be the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. So poor non-whites were the most affected by that devastation. The populations that are primarily affected by climate change are those that are unable to solve the problem, and they're also not even to blame for it. Some of these images are from the typhoon Haiyan that hit the Philippines. So, all right. So, we know, right, that debating data and statistics, that time is done. We really need to stand up on this issue and assert ourselves. And this photo that I took here is actually from the People's Climate March in New York City. I'm curious, how many people are familiar with that? Okay. So in September 2014, there were 400,000 people in the streets of New York City protesting, and they were just from every different group. And there were religious individuals, and there were indigenous populations, but I didn't see a secular presence at all. So I don't think that this is about being from different perspectives within the group, or whether we're a Republican or a Democrat, or different genders or skin colors. We really need to come together and form a secular movement for this. And so I've heard a lot of excitement here at the conference about how we're making the secular future, and in 100 years or 200 years, we're going to have all these achievements. And I don't want to be really doom and gloom, but this future that we're building is on a planet right here, planet Earth, and we have to keep it hospitable. Or what good is all of that we're doing? And I feel that this choice to act on climate change will be made by our generation, but it will affect life on Earth for all of these generations to come. So I think instead of looking at this and just hiding and watching some Netflix, we should rise to the occasion. We have the technologies, we have the economic instruments, the financial resources to do this. And the United States really is the wealthiest society that has ever existed, and we have the resources to lead the effort. And for many of us as secular students, we already have groups. They're active on these other social justice issues, and so we have a platform where we can confront the problem. So I want to highlight just a couple of resources for climate action, which can be accessed if you're an individual or as a group. So the first one would be 350.org. Actually, they helped organize this march. And it's probably the biggest and most visible climate organization that I've encountered, and they actually get a little bit of airtime because you don't see this issue talked about a lot in the press. But mainly they function as this networking hub, and they have links to other smaller climate organizations, and they have all of these resources that you can download. So for some of our tabling at our SSA, we actually went on there and downloaded some PDF files and laid out things that explain it, because climate change, it's a big issue, and there's a lot to understand about why the science says what it says. So another resource that I would point you to is citizensclimatelobby.org, especially if you are political. So you can sign up to be a member of the organization at no cost, and the goal is to create this political will for a livable world by empowering people. And they have all of these talks that you can watch for 2 to 5 minutes long, and they help you understand these issues that are abstract. And the main thing that I really like about Citizens Climate Lobby, and why I think that is a useful tool, is because they're pushing this carbon fee and dividend program. And so a lot of times people say, well, we can't deal with climate change because it's too expensive and there's all these problems. But this is actually something that could possibly work. So basically it's you put a fee on carbon, and that's because we're trying to account for all these externalized costs of burning fossil fuels. So when we go to the store and we buy gas, we're not paying for all of the costs of the gas, like the drilling, the refining, the transporting of the gasoline, because there are other people in other parts of the world that are actually paying for it with their health or their local economy. And so by adding this fee to a carbon tax, essentially, and then having it rise up over the years, and all of that funding that comes from that is then dispersed amongst different populations. So if you are putting into it in your local city, it goes back to you, and it helps offset, because you're going to be paying more then when you go to the pump, and there are people that can't afford to do that. So let me get out of this here. I have one more video that I want to show you, because I feel like the best way that I can close my thoughts on this and then have a discussion with all of you is to use Carl Sagan's words, because he kind of makes science like poetry, I think. So,
from this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they can become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale planet, the only home we've ever known.
All right. Well, I was hopeful that we would then maybe talk about some of this, because I didn't want to stand up here and just lecture everyone on the evidence for climate change. I wondered if other people had perspectives and thoughts about what could we do in our community to take action on this the same way we have with other things.
I think that the climate change denial that we see is also very similar to a lot of the other trends that we see, where people are mistrusting science, like anti-vax movement, non-GMOs, alternative medicine, stuff like that. And I think that there is some that we can do by through activism and convincing people. But I think a lot of it comes down to teaching people at a very young age that science is the way to figure out what's true, like early childhood education, which is really, I think, more daunting because that means that it takes generations to really change that mindset.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with policy. I mean, if you're going into politics, that's great, but a lot of it has to do with how kids are brought up, how they're taught to trust science and trust evidence.
But I don't know, I would challenge you there though, like, do we have time to do that though? And really, from where we're at as secular students, we're not educators. What are we going to do from our standpoint? Back there. Yeah.
I grew up on a farm, and I grew up with people who are in like an agriculture industry who have actively, my dad, I just think is the prime example of just kind of a dissonance. He's actively recycled, he's actively like reduced the carbon footprint, but in his life he's also very outspoken that climate change is not real. So I guess it's a very strange dynamic, but I see it in a lot of like agriculture communities.
Yeah.
It's a very Republican thing to say that like humans aren't the death of the earth, but we should still take care of it. So I guess I think a big step would just be to include the agriculture industry and to make sure that they're on the side of taking care of the earth because they have so much control. But I guess how do you buy into that sort of mentality when I do believe that humans are having a detrimental effect on the planet?
Mm-hmm. Right there. Yep.
I do agree that education is a major component of changing the atmosphere of how people engage with climate change and understanding it. But I think a big part of why the U.S. doesn't have the same kind of movement, although there are movements, but also in the secular community, is that our group is highly educated compared to other populations and a little bit wealthier and also very white. So in a lot of ways, we are distanced from the reality of the inequality and of the poverty and of the contamination that other countries are facing, other people in our own country are facing. So it's kind of a privilege of being ignorant about it and not having to live with it. So I think, in part, it's not just making sure people understand the science of climate change, but the inequality that's going on and how climate change affects people differently in a way that is negative.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, especially following up your comment, because you're talking about farming, right? Well, we are having some problems with farming here in the United States, I think, and so I wonder how we could reach out to that population.
I think one of the important things that could, in addition to education, especially with early childhood, etc., something that might be maybe more immediately impactful would be a clarification of the language we use when dealing with climate change. Just like with the evolutionary example, it's not a matter of do you believe it, as do you understand it. And then also being able to distinct climate change from other environmental issues such as, poisoning the river or, plastics. They are almost equally important things when it comes to saving the planet, but there are ways that we can differentiate those. So I think it's a matter of adjusting the language to do you understand climate change and how it functions? And then also, what are the impacts? So just because the world's getting hotter doesn't necessarily mean it's getting drier for all locations.
Right.
It's a matter of extremes and how things are changing, not necessarily, upping the ante all the time.
Mm-hmm.
One pet peeve of mine that I see is that people, the amount of effort that people put into the different aspects of climate change is not at all proportional to the impact that those things have on climate change. Right? So find someone who cares a whole bunch and will really get mad and puts a lot of effort into something like recycling cans, which is not a bad thing to do and it is good. But if you compare that to things like factory farming and big things that have a lot of impact, they don't put proportional amounts of effort into the things that actually have the large amounts of impact. So I feel like within our community, one thing we can do is tell people the scale of the issues of how big of an impact each of your. Let me rephrase this as saying, the most good you can do per unit of time that you spend on the issue. What's the most efficient way that you can spend your time?
Yeah. And probably making sure people don't get overwhelmed, because I think that's, like, sometimes I talk to people, oh, I care about climate change, just shuts right down, because it's just so big.
I think that there has to be, and I have no idea how to implement this at all, but there has to be sort of a cultural shift in attitude about it for it to occur, because there's a lot of people who are so used to excess that they cannot envision changing their own lifestyles, and they think it's too much of a hassle for them. And even if we try and make them understand how big of an impact their excess, has, it's too inwardly focused so it's a matter of making people care. I think John Oliver said it really well. He was like, we've asked, the people, don't you want to leave a better world for your grandchildren? And we've said collectively, oh, fuck them. So there needs to be a shift in thinking to where people actually do care about that. And I think millennials are actually doing a really good job of that. Every survey I've seen has shown that, older and younger millennials, that millennials tend to have that attitude more. But it shouldn't just be up to us. We need to bring other people from other generations into it. It's not a young person's game. It's an everybody's game.
Yeah, we're really not responsible for it, honestly. It's parents' generations, but we're going to clean it up. So.
I don't like to say this, but I really feel very gloomy about the subject in general. It seems like all the scientists that talk about it often talk about the tipping point and how we're possibly already beyond that.
Yeah.
The changes that need to be made on a global scale to combat the issue are not going to happen in time to have an impact, and there'll be an ecological pushback that will probably do more for it than anything that I could suggest.
Yeah, I hear you there. I agree.
I'd say that increasing the outreach and impact of secularism is also a very important thing, because talking to people that either don't believe in it or don't believe that it's man-made, things like that, a lot of them look at it from a religious perspective of, well, God made this for us. He put us in this little playpen. Nothing we can do here is going to make it so we can't live here. The whole God will fix it mentality. But once you look at it from a perspective of, well, what if there isn't a God that'll fix it for us? Then you really start to realize, well, crap, we can really screw this up. And we already have.
Yeah. I can take one more, and I saw your hand back there.
I was wondering what you thought about the efficacy of legal changes as some going into politics. Things like the Kyoto Protocol or like national restrictions on the athletics emissions.
Yeah, I think that's really only going to be effective if we get big money out of politics. Like that's the problem. People funding climate change denial. So we have to get them out. So, and I have to stop. So thank you.